Okay, well, I know we still have some people joining, but let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mandy Hanasak. I work with Seattle Children's Foundation and Guild Association. And as my colleague said in the chat, thank you for being here. We are so grateful for your time and sharing part of your day with us. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things here on the screen. Make sure your volume is on and turned up so you can hear everybody. We do have everybody muted at this point, but please consider sending any chats or, any comments or questions in the chat, and we will be monitoring that throughout the program. Once the event begins, you can choose between what's called grid view or speaker view. It's up in the top right corner of your screen, and that will allow you to see fewer or more faces, which is kind of fun since we're not together in person. And this program will be recorded, so we want to make sure we respect your privacy. So if you'd rather not be recorded, please do turn off your camera. Otherwise, we would love to see your face if you're comfortable with that. And we won't have a lot of slides. We purposefully did not have a lot of slides for this event so that we could really see more of each other as the program goes on. So this event, Research in Action, Women in Science, is part of our Research Champions program, an annual membership program for supporters of the Seattle Children's Research Institute. Last year, we had more than 1,000 members of this program, and that is open to anybody who gives, individuals and family foundations who give 1,000 or more, or organizations, so corporations, nonprofit organizations, guilds who give 2,500 or more in a calendar year to anywhere at the Research Institute. So we are so grateful for that ongoing support. The Research Champions program has been active for more than 10 years now, and that funding is so critical to help our researchers do their groundbreaking work and be as innovative as they are here at Seattle Children's. So we're so grateful to the community and the ongoing support. Thank you. And then we're just going to jump right in. So our moderator today is Dr. Leslie Walker-Harding. She is current Senior Vice President and Chief Academic Officer for Seattle Children's Hospital, as well as the Ford Morgan Endowed Professor and Chair of the Department of Pediatrics and Associate Dean for the University of Washington. She has been dedicated to the health and well-being of children and adolescents for more than 25 years, particularly in the area of prevention of adolescent substance abuse, adolescent substance use and promotion of healthy adolescent development. Her service on national boards and local community projects is all aimed at improving the health and well-being of children, adolescents, and young adults at a national and global level. So please help me welcome Dr. Leslie Walker-Harding. She will she'll introduce us to the other panelists, and we'll dive right into the questions. And then towards the end of the program, we will have some time to get to your questions and comments. So thank you again for joining us. And Dr. Walker-Harding, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that gracious introduction. Well, welcome. Good evening, everybody. This is really exciting. I really want to start first, though, with a thank you, a sincere thank you for your commitment to research and helping us try to help children and adolescents find cures and treatments and ways of taking care of them so that they can be the best that they could possibly be and grow up into wonderful, productive adults. It's such hard work, and it's so wonderful to know that there's so many of you out there that are really helping everybody to move forward. In particular, it's really important because when you have scientists with new ideas or early career scientists, it's kind of hard to get started with those new ideas without good support. And your support helps us and helps many young scientists, as well as not so young scientists with new ideas, get them off the ground. And it's a lot of times those ideas are the ones that move forward and really help us to cure and treat children so that they can be happy and healthy. I'm particularly happy today, though, to introduce you to two incredible scientists. They're really just, every time I talk to them, I get very energized and excited and about the future and what we're doing in science here at Seattle Children's. So I know once you hear them and hear some of their thoughts and where they're coming from and where they're going, you'll be excited too. So let me first introduce them so you know who they are. And I'll start with Alexis Kaczynski. She's at Dr. Alexis Kaczynski. It's very important for women. She is at the Center for Global Infectious Disease, and she is an associate professor there. She received her BS degree in chemistry from Harvey Mudd College and her PhD from Harvard University. In 2015, she started a lab at the center, which is focused on discovering how pathogens such as malaria interact with their human host, and using this knowledge, help us to eliminate these kinds of infections. Second, you're going to hear from Ghayda Mirzaa. Dr. Ghayda Mirzaa, she is a pediatrician and researcher who is dedicated her career to helping children and families with developmental brain disorders. She received her MD from the Arabian Gulf University and did her residency in pediatrics at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She completed her fellowships in human genetics and molecular genetics at the University of Chicago and the University of Washington. So thank you both so much for coming and being with us this evening. And we can jump right into the questions. I think, and I know there's some young people on the call, as well as some young at heart, and I hope that you really help us make this discussion today by putting some questions in the chat, letting us know if you want to ask a question live. That makes it so much fun, and both Alexis and Ghayda and I just really like that kind of interaction. So I hope that you find ways to talk with us, cross this Zoom world that we're in. So let's start out with the first question, Alexis, and hopefully you can give us some insights. Tell us a little bit about your role at Seattle Children's and how you became interested in your particular field of work in science.
Yeah, and so I'm incredibly lucky to be able to work on infectious diseases that impact kids and families all over the world at Seattle Children's. My laboratory is really interested in how infectious diseases interact with the people that they infect. The really challenging thing about infectious diseases, of course, is the incredible burden that they put on lives all over the world. But the really hopeful thing about infectious diseases is they can't survive without us. And it's not like they need every part of us. So they need little bits and pieces of our bodies. And so if we figure out what those things are and take them away, we really believe we can combat infectious diseases. And so I'm lucky to do this as part of a really, really interdisciplinary team. And those sorts of new perspectives, ideas, and the diversity of different perspectives and insights into the science that we do is really what sort of drives me to the work and really shapes our science every day.
I have to have you though talk about your mosquitoes.
Yeah, so not everybody has a stomach for working on malaria. In order to study malaria in the lab, we actually can't grow the form of the parasite that infects us in a test tube. So lots of infections you can grow in a test tube and then study them that way. For malaria, you actually have to grow them in a mosquito. So doing the research is not necessarily for the faint of heart. So we actually have an incredible team that grows about 50,000 mosquitoes every week so that we can infect them with malaria. And then in order to do our experiments, we actually have to hand dissect the salivary glands until basically last year. And so, one of the really cool things that we were able to do because of some of the funding from philanthropists like all of you, is that we were actually able to build a mosquito dissection robot. And so now it's a slightly more high-tech operation. We now grow all of these mosquitoes, still a laborious process, but in order to do the research we do now, we have a cool little mosquito dissection robot. So it's a little bit less painful. And so I think everyone should work on malaria now.
So much. And Ghayda, so tell us a little bit about your role here at Children's and how you became interested in your field of work in science.
Yeah, well, thanks. First of all, thanks, Leslie, for this lovely introduction. And I really want to thank you all for your, commitment and passion for improving childhood health, adolescent health. It's really great to hang out with you this evening. So I'm a geneticist, and I actually got first interested in genetics. Actually, where I grew up, which was in the Middle East. I was born in Lexington, Kentucky, but went with my family, traveled all over, and part of my life was spent in the Middle East, where there were a lot of genetic disorders by virtue of that population structure over there. And what I saw is that they really caused significant neurodevelopmental problems for kids. And so early on, I really felt like there was a huge need. I mean, the health burden for genetic disorders, just as with infectious disorders, is quite high. And sadly, for a lot of these conditions, the way people think about them is that they are incurable, irreversible, there's nothing to do. And I felt like I wanted to really pursue that to see if we can change that a little bit. So I pursued genetics really with that spirit. And I decided to come to and pursue training in the States at the top centers that I felt like would allow me to at least get the tools that are most advanced in genetics to really help with that. And at the time when I started my training, Leslie, this was now, a long time ago. At that time, I felt like the best I could do was to actually, learn those genetic tools and methodologies to actually figure out the diagnosis, right? So that we can actually pinpoint what is that exact genetic problem. Little did I know then that the ideas of therapies, even for kids with these genetic problems, are going to be available in the foreseeable future. And that actually has been one of the most rewarding things ever, is that we now can translate these genetic discoveries and our knowledge about genetic variants to actual therapies that can actually help improve kids' lives. So this has been really like the focus of my work, certainly here at Seattle Children's, has been to really take these genetic sequencing technologies, try to see how we can quickly move them towards better therapies. So, and it's been great. And I'll just add, actually, by the way, is that I'm a huge fan of Alexis's work, because one of my uncles actually sadly passed away from malaria. Actually, he lived in Ghana for many, many years, and his family still resides there. And he suffered from it for quite some time before passing away. This was years ago, Alexis. So I'm a huge fan of Alexis's work, and I'm a cheerleader all the way for her.
I'm curious, like for the audience, like what can you talk about maybe one of the genetic conditions, and like how you see what you hope in your lifetime would happen? What are some of your hopes with your field and what you look at?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say one of the most common genetic problems that we deal with has been epilepsy. So epilepsy, which means seizures or abnormal electrical activity of the child's brain, usually can happen any time actually in an individual's lifetime, from the moment they're born all the way to later stages of adulthood, at older ages. And sometimes it's caused by fundamentally an abnormal structure of the brain. So the brain can actually have some structural abnormalities that can cause the epilepsy. And sometimes when we look at a brain MRI scan, we don't see any abnormalities. So it suggests there is some functional difference, some networking abnormality that's happened. A lot of data happened through pioneers before me, actually, that showed that epilepsy can be genetic. And at the time, it was kind of like, people considered it like a exploratory thing. Yeah, let's see if we can find the genetic cause. Could it help? Maybe, maybe not. And for a long time, for decades, anti-epilepsy treatments were mostly considered Band-Aid solutions, meaning that, essentially they suppress the seizures, but don't fundamentally change anything about the molecular mechanism or the genetic mechanism at the cellular level, right? Thanks to amazing work also by so many pioneering groups now, anti-epilepsy treatments have actually now become targeted because of these early genetic discoveries. So now when we understand at the level of the gene and the protein, where the abnormality happens, where the error happens, there's actually now drug targets that actually are addressing those specific mechanisms. So I think in epilepsy in particular, I would say it's been actually extremely exciting in that we not only understand the genetics better, but we actually have drugs that target those specific genetic switches that we're finding in kids. And so hopefully that means that rather than this trial and error process that a lot of kids sadly have to go through to better control their seizures, hopefully we can actually better select the drug that's right for each child who has epilepsy. So that's been, I think, one of the more exciting areas to work on in the past few years.
Yeah, that's what you're talking about, really kind of precision medicine then, right? Or personalized medicine, that you can get a drug that can go straight to the area that you need for that individual. That's exciting. That's exciting.
That is, yeah, that's extremely exciting. Yeah, exactly. And thankfully, like finding the genetic mutation is no longer the end goal. It's actually now the first step. So we can hopefully then figure out the best drug and the best, therapy in general. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
And if I can just, Dr. Leslie Walker-Harding, I'm sorry, can I just interrupt? We have a question from the audience that's really relevant to what Ghayda is talking about. A question from Mark. You had mentioned, Ghayda, why are there more genetic conditions in the Middle East than in other parts of the world? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So every population in the world has its own, if you will, genetic landscape. We all share, actually, the vast majority of our genes are all shared across us, regardless of our ethnic background. But there are some populations, so in the Middle East, for example, there is a high rate of marrying among relatives, right? And so what happens in that process is that when people marry people who are more closely related to them, then in that way, if there are any genetic changes that are present in those families, these large extended families, what happens is that you have a higher chance of meeting someone who's a carrier of the same genetic defect that might cause a childhood disorder. And so by virtue of the population structure, and it's not unique, by the way, to the Middle East, it happens in a few other populations as well. Even like if you think about like, some parts of the world where there are like small villages, isolated towns, things like that, there's always a chance within these scenarios to actually have an increase in the number of these genetic variants or mutations. And it just and sometimes, sadly, it's by chance. And speaking of our like population here in the United States, and I would say, for anybody who's ever been to our genetics clinic at Seattle Children's, it takes a really long time to see a geneticist, simply because, and this is something we're really working hard to improve, and it's simply because there's still a lot of genetic problems out there. I think people think of these conditions sometimes as rare, but really they're sadly collectively common conditions, and a percentage of kids have genetic problems. And sometimes it's because of the population structure. Sometimes it's a random genetic error that can happen to anybody, really. But the Middle East happens to be particularly because of the population structure.
Great. Thank you. I think that was helpful.
Yeah.
So Alexis, I'm going to change gears a little bit and ask you, in this world of science, how has being a woman affected your career, do you think, as a scientist coming in, being a scientist, now being a scientist that's very successful?
Well, so I've only ever done it as a woman, so it's sometimes hard to answer questions like this. I think I always sort of advise people to take all career advice with a grain of salt, because no one's ever done their career more than once, and so we're all just speaking from our own experience. But I think for me, until like really just the last couple of years, I've really never had a supervisor or sort of direct mentor who wasn't a man. And so, I went to engineering college. It was 80% male in the student population. Almost all of my professors were male. I sort of got frustrated with the very insular nature of an engineering college, and actually dropped out of school for 6 months and went to go do political activism in Washington, D.C. for scientific funding. And at that time, like my supervisors were male in that job. And then I sort of went to graduate school because I knew I wanted to be a scientist, and my advisor was male, and I did postdoctoral studies and my advisor was male. And so throughout that entire time, not that I haven't had, great advice, and in some cases, like I had wonderful mentors who were role models, but in every case, my supervisors or mentors didn't like sort of look like me or talk like me or have the same background, have the same societal expectations. So really early on, I think in that process, I learned that, I had to sort of make decisions not to try to emulate another person, but instead to try to like think about what I think the most important next steps are and then take those. And I didn't really, it's not to say that I haven't been able to see really inspirational women in my career, but they weren't the people who were closest to sort of my day-to-day life. And so I think it forced me to be more independent earlier. And I think also, everything was kind of a chance because nothing was sort of the traveled road. And so it made it in some ways easier to take chances, I think, and ask bigger questions and, just follow what I thought the right path was rather than sort of having an obvious person to emulate. So for me, it's been really fun. It doesn't mean it didn't come with some insecurities early on. But again, I can't say how that would be different if I wasn't a woman because I've only ever done it this way.
Great, thank you. I want to switch up the question a little bit, Ghayda, for you. So as a scientist, how do you think it's affected your life as a woman? Is there some good parts being a scientist, or some things you felt you had to give up? I saw a question, I couldn't see it all together, but there's, I think, some people that want to know, as a scientist, how has that affected you as a woman?
Yeah. So, thanks, Leslie, for this question. I think that, I think it's been, I think as a woman in general, I have felt very early on, I have to say, about the stereotypes and against women who are in science, and even more so like in science and medicine at the same time. I remember, the first person who actually opened a door for me in science was actually a female mentor. Actually, she was a university professor who was my geneticist in college. Was basically, we had 2 lectures in genetics throughout the whole curriculum. That was it. One of them was about Down syndrome and the other one was about karyotyping or something, like that. And I was just so fascinated by her and so impressed by her that I went to her after her lecture and I said, I think I'm interested in genetics. What would you advise me? And she immediately said, let me talk to this person to actually, coordinate for you a summer internship at the University of Chicago, which is where I ended up doing my training. And so the first person to open a door for me was a female mentor who was an amazing scientist. And since then, though, I think my experience has been very much shared with Alexis, is that after that junction, that critical junction where that door was open for me, I have felt like all along my training, I was mostly surrounded by men. So I felt, as a woman, to answer your question, I felt like I actually, like, science, being a woman and a scientist had forced me to really develop certain qualities that I might have not initially had, including a lot of perseverance, a lot of grit, a lot of, sometimes, frankly, really, really ignoring what people were saying to me about this career path. I still remember there were a lot of friends of my mom who would tell me to talk to their daughters about, my career track, but it wasn't to tell them that, you should become a doctor, you should become a scientist. Actually, a lot of the time they would be like, could you talk to my daughter? I really don't want her to become a doctor. Could you talk her out of it? And I would be like, little do you know that I actually love what I do, so I'm not going to do that. And so I feel like, it kind of forced me in a way to develop certain qualities that I really initially I didn't have. I had insecurities. I wasn't sure of myself. I wasn't. I initially really cared about what every single person told me or thought about me, and along the way, you kind of learn that you have to follow your passions. It's not an even playing field, unfortunately. Even today, it's absolutely not an even playing field for women in science, I think. And I think that was something that actually is a really hard lesson also to learn, the hard way. So I think you kind of have to also come to terms with that and see what you can do to actually change that. So all of these kind of feelings, all of these have been actually impacted completely by my career choice. I don't know if I would have come to these realizations had I chosen something else, which, or another career track, which may or may not be easier for women, so, yeah.
That's, it sounds like a lot that I could have said some of the same things as well. It's, but one thing that's clear, I think, for me, and clearly for both of you, is we love what we do. So it's worth all the effort to get to where you are. And thank you for all of your strong efforts, to change and be on that front line, really making space for women in science. I want to, and I know we have some questions that are coming in, so I just wanted to make sure with Alexis that you also could, talk about like how Ghayda mentioned about epilepsy. What is the exciting thing? What is that thing that you hope you see in infectious diseases come to be in the future? What you hope to contribute? What is the exciting dream?
Yeah. Well, I actually think there's a lot of parallels between what Ghayda talked about and what I would hope for the field. I think where we are scientifically is incredible, right? There's a lot of parallels in infectious disease. We're now at the point where we can actually figure out, precisely between a pathogen and a host, what are those key determinants, and not just what are those key determinants sort of broadly for everybody, but for you, if you were to be infected with malaria, like what is the specific thing that we know about that specific infection, and then translating that to a specific intervention for you. And if you get a different infection, or if your neighbor gets a different infection, I just have great hope that we're going to be able to really, in a very detailed, personalized way, target lots of different infections in the decades to come. I really feel strongly about that. I think we're going to be able to repurpose a lot of the tools that we already have in the clinic and use them smartly to really target things. My hope, and I think we can make choices that will make this hope a reality, is that sort of precise, intelligent, and encouraging treatment is available for all people, and that we do research in a way that it will be available for people with diverse backgrounds, people from diverse regions of the globe, and it won't be only available for sort of a select few who can afford it, or for whatever reason have been the target of current research. And so my hope is that we do science and the rollout of interventions against infectious disease in a way that really touches everybody and not just touches a select few.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I hope people have a sense of the excitement I have and the fortune I have to get to work with both of them, Ghayda and Alexis. I don't know if you want to switch. I see questions popping up, so I want to make sure that we can get to all of those. So I don't know. I think Mandy, were you going to lead that?
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. Our first question was from Sophie, who is an aspiring scientist, she says. So Sophie asks, what inspired you to pursue science as a career in general? Was there a specific experience or just a general love of the study of the area, a study area? Dr. Walker-Harding, I would love to open that up to you. Like, what got you started? Was there something specific? So you've all touched on a little bit, but we haven't heard from you, Dr. Walker-Harding. We'd love to hear more.
Yeah, my area I'm actually an adolescent medicine specialist. I went to, residency for 3 years for pediatrics, and then 3 more years to do adolescent medicine. And I knew that from the time I was in medical school, because I was so interested, even in high school, in what happens to people. Why are there some teenagers that seem so great and then they seem to go one way, or some people that were really quiet and all of a sudden they're blossomed and they're doing these incredible things you wouldn't have expected. Adolescence was really exciting to me, and I still love it to this day. And so looking at how can you help people get past some of the pitfalls, some of the things that can happen during teen years, is what I was most interested in. And over time, as I went through training and fellowship, I got very interested in substance use prevention and treatment. And for a long while here, I had a treatment program that, because we do so many things for adults, but teenagers aren't little adults. They are in their own category themselves, and what we need to do to help somebody move out of substance use is very different than what we need to do for adults. So I've always taken the time to figure out how can we work with the development of the brain and help kids get out of substance use and have their lives back. And even more importantly now, how can we prevent kids from ever even trying the first substance until their brain is done. And there's a lot of great work that on prevention that actually there's a lot we can do that works. And so over time, I've kind of continued to evolve and be an advocate for us really paying much more attention to prevention while also treating the kids we have, but preventing. We have so many lives that we have lost to substance use, to the repercussions of substance use that probably could have been like Alexis and Ghayda and these amazing scientists trying to figure out cures and solutions to social problems that we have, but instead they weren't able to get that chance because early on substance use kind of derailed them. So for me, trying to help kids, you know, it started out as a kid watching some kids go one direction or another and trying to figure out why that happened and wanting to make that be different.
Great, thank you. And we have another question from Avishri, and I'm totally mispronouncing your name. I am so deeply sorry. Who's an aspiring doctor and asks, being a woman in society, we are expected to be more family oriented. I would like to have a family one day, but I would like to know, those of you who have families, how did that impact your profession, if it did? And those of you who don't have families, is there a reason linked to your profession? What a great question. I will open it up to any of you that would like to take that.
I'm happy to take that one. I have an almost 4-year-old daughter, and she's wonderful, and I love being a mom, and I wouldn't have done it any other way. You know, it was, I have to say it's been an adventure. My daughter's adopted, and we had 14 hours notice when she was born. To sort of go to the hospital, and then my husband and I were parents overnight. And it was, my lab was less than a year old, and I had actually just hired my first postdoctoral fellow, so I had 3 brand new people in the lab who were untrained, and starting this whole research career. So I, you know, if I could have had a little bit more notice, maybe that would make the career work-life balance thing a little bit easier. But it is totally possible. You know, it was a lot of juggling at the beginning, and now we're down to a rhythm, which of course gets interrupted by COVID and things. But you know, I think it is such a source of inspiration for me that it's really like an incredible thing in my life to be a mom. And I would say, you know, I think it's, you know, I love being a scientist. I love being the first one in the world to make a discovery. There's a lot about the nuts and bolts of being a scientist that I find incredibly inspiring. And 95% of the days, that's like enough. I don't need any other outside thing, right? But on the days where it's really hard, you know, on the days where like you didn't get a grant that you were sure you were going to get, on the days where, you know, whatever happens, right? And it's just really overwhelming and you get down. You know, I've always found a lot of strength in thinking about the people whose lives we could impact. That's always been really meaningful to me. You know, I've done some traveling because I work on infectious diseases that impact people all over the world. And so like thinking of little kids in malaria clinics has always been that source of inspiration to me on the days when it's hard. And being a parent and thinking about, quite frankly, how easy my life is comparatively, but like knowing how hard it is for parents whose kids are not malaria free, who are dealing with all sorts of infectious disease, who don't have the means to deal with it the way I do. Can't just like go to the pediatrician when their kid gets sick, right? Like I can just have to go home to my daughter and like know how lucky I am, and that provides that sort of extra boost on those 5% of days where just like loving science a lot isn't quite enough. So to me, it's yes, it involves a lot of time management and some juggling and some days that feel overwhelming, but it's so inspirational. And I I, hope that it goes both ways. I think my family life makes my work better, and I think my work makes my family life better. I think I'm a better mom because I'm really inspired by what I do at work. And so, for me, it's as close to a win-win as you can have in this insane time and world.
Great. Well, we have more questions coming in, so I'd like to keep going. Although I'd like to hear from each of you on all the questions. We just would run out of time rather quickly. So from Hannah, what advice do you have for a college senior as far as what kinds of experiences to seek before possibly going on to a graduate program? I'm a biology major and I'm not sure where to go quite yet, but I have had embryology and genetic counseling on my mind recently. So thanks, Hannah, for that question. And again, I'll leave it up to Dr. Walker-Harding if you want to jump in.
I think Ghayda might.
Perfect.
I know. I was going to say, I was like, I like those fields. I like both of those, biology and genetic counseling. Well, so my advice, was it Hannah? Hi, Hannah. So my advice would be is give yourself the time. So it sounds like you're thinking along the right, you're thinking in the right direction, basically, is that you're thinking really hard about what you want to do at exactly the right time, I have always felt like as I was even younger than you, I felt like it was kind of challenging to make those life decisions, right? Because you want to choose a career that makes you happy. You want to choose a career that makes you fulfilled. It is not an easy decision to make. You may stumble along the way in that you could go into something and realize you don't really, enjoy it, or you don't find it fulfilling, and that's okay. And nobody's path is a straightforward, trail through the park, right? As I think we all kind of imagine. My advice would be really on a practical level would be to, if you find yourself interested, let's say in embryology or genetic counseling or biology driven major, let's say, try to seek out working in let's say, for example, as an example, in a lab. That not to again, I'm biased here, running a genetics lab, but seek out some experiences if you'd like between your undergrad and grad school to actually work in those environments and interact and find mentors who can actually advise you and who you can actually work with and see, do you enjoy this career path or not? So I think seeking out work experiences, volunteer experiences is always nice, mentorship experiences, and even if you didn't have time or for a variety of life reasons, especially now, sadly, that we're all dealing with this pandemic, even just talking to people, seeking out and asking people for advice and questions, and people will connect you. Even if you don't know somebody who's working in a field that you might be interested in, you will find somebody. They're only probably one or two people away from you, in your life. So seeking out and asking questions. We get questions, for what it's worth. We get questions all the time from high school all the way from high school students all the way to grad students, asking about different career tracks. And here at Seattle Children's, we have an office for teaching and education that kind of helps match students with mentors and things like that. And we love those kinds of interactions because it's really fun. It's a win-win for everybody. So talking to people as much as possible and really, seeking out experiences, whether work experiences or volunteer experiences, I think is a good way to go, because then it will really help guide you along the way.
I would also just add on to that no sort of sidestep or education is really wasted. I mean, those things that you do, those experiences that you have, whether they're in the classroom or outside of the classroom, the weird ones are what ends up making you that sort of interdisciplinary investigator in the long run, right? We all, have taken non-linear paths in some ways, and those sort of off the beaten path experiences, I think, are sometimes what give you those sort of unique ideas. So it's great you're thinking about your career, but don't be afraid to do things that maybe, a conventional advisor tells you not to do, because those are the things that'll make your ideas richer in the long run, I think.
Great, thank you. Okay, Ghayda, this one is for you as well. This is from Serena, and Peyton is also wondering the same thing. So going back to epilepsy, I have heard from another Seattle children's scientist that there have been cases where neurosurgeons remove the part of the brain in a child that causes the seizures. How effective is this course of treatment? And could it be something that is more common course of treatment later on, even though it is more invasive than others?
Yeah. So, Serena and Peyton, that's an excellent question. I actually happen to know this research project a little bit. So here at Seattle Children's, there's a phenomenal neurosurgery team led by multiple people who are absolutely amazing, but some of them who are Dr. Jeff Ogeman, and Dr. Jason Hoffman, and others. So they perform amazing, sometimes life-saving surgeries, right, for kids who have epilepsy due to structural malformation. So they sometimes unfortunately, epilepsy can be so severe that that part of the brain may need to be removed to help treat the seizures. And it actually has been life-saving for many kids. Now, over the past 10 years that we've been here, we have worked together. So our team in genetics and our neurosurgery colleagues, we've worked together where when any part of the brain is removed for a child, if it actually helps them out, we actually get that brain tissue here in the lab and do genetic studies to see if we can actually find a specific genetic change in that brain region that might have triggered the epilepsy. And the reason we do that is that sadly, in some kids, even after they get the epilepsy surgery, for some of them, not all of them, but for some of them, the seizures come back again, which suggests again that it's not just about the structural, abnormality. There's something more, there's something more going on. There's something more functional going on, something about the wiring or the way that the brain regions talk to each other. And so we want to be able to figure that out. So a few years ago, and again, this is, by the way, work that I honestly can say that it wouldn't have happened, I don't think, in any place other than Seattle, because of the fact that we have such an amazing group of doctors around here and researchers who all work together from different fields. And so it's such a huge multidisciplinary team here. So a few years ago, when we were doing this testing on the brain tissue, we found specific genetic switches that were only present in the brain. And some of these genetic switches can actually be targeted by drugs. So there are now drugs that can actually suppress the seizure activity in the brain in these kids. And actually, there's a clinical trial right now. This is not my work. This is actually the work led by our neurosurgery team. There's an actual clinical trial right now for kids who have had surgery, but whose seizures came back after the surgery using these drugs that target the genetic switch. So this is this is a project that we know quite a bit about, because it's been one of the most rewarding, I think, projects that I've personally been involved with. And it really helps. It gives people more options. It gives families more options, that even if a child has seizures after they've had surgery, it's not the end of the road. There are still things that we can do to try to help. So that's the project in a nutshell. Yes.
Great. Thank you. A couple more questions, and we were scheduled to end at 6:15, but these questions are so good. We hope you can stay with us for a few more minutes. This is another great question from Abashri. I'm hoping I'm getting better with your name. I apologize. I'm interested in going through a BSMD combined accelerated program. Do you have any experience with this, or do you have tips of making connections with mentors and people around you organically?
Yeah, so I don't know the particulars about like this specific BSMD program option, simply because I think there are so many more options now than when I did my training. My MD training actually did involve getting a bachelor's degree in medicine and surgery at the time, but it was really kind of part of that whole MD program, right? So at the end of it, you continue on to do the clinical portion, which is a few years, and then you get the full MD, and then you move on to residency, and so on and so forth. Now, so what's nice, and I think this echoes a little bit of what Alexis also alluded to, is that for every career track now, previously things were much more traditional in terms of how you choose where to get to in your career. Right now, things have changed. There are now so many ways to pursue the career of your dreams and there are these traditional maps, if you will, are no longer there really, which is great, I think. And so to do, for example, if you're interested, let's say in clinical medicine, there, doing an MD, starting with a bachelor's degree could be actually a great way to go, of course. If you wanted to pursue something more along, a scientific route or a physician scientist track or things like that, what I would advise in that case is to also try to find then, either a lab or a graduate degree program that you're interested in. But there are there are a lot of people who can actually advise as well along the way for that career track. My advice would be, the nice thing I think from my understanding about the BSMD program is that you actually have, once you finish your bachelor's degree component, is that you can actually then decide at that point what you'd like to pursue, whether it's more clinical sciences or a physician scientist track or a PhD program. So it kind of gives you even more flexibility than I think more traditional options in the past. So yeah, I think it's a really solid choice. I'm sure there are so many also people that you could talk to actually get more advice about this career track. I'm always happy to chat about that too.
Great, thank you. Alexis, I'm going to direct this one to you. This is from Louisa. What do you think could be the next breakthrough in your research in the next 5 years? So you talked a little bit before about long-term, what you hope through your lifetime, what could be accomplished, but what in the shorter term could really be that breakthrough?
Yeah, Louisa, I think, thanks for the question. And I love talking about this, so particularly thanks for this question. I really think in the next, several years, we're going to see a real opportunity to sort of repurpose the sort of library of drugs and therapies that we have out there for more diverse infections, and even outside of infectious disease. So we have all of these drugs that have gone through FDA approval. Some of them have gone through clinical trials but haven't been approved, not because they're not safe, but because they're not sort of effective for the very specific thing that they were tested for. And I think now we're collecting more and more information on those so-called failed clinical trials. And I think what we're learning more and more is that they can be effective for other things. Now, there's huge advantages for this. One of the things is that, we've already gone through the drug development process. And so we know these drugs are safe and they can be sort of rapidly deployed into the field to help people's lives. And I think this is particularly important when we think about kids' health, right? You would never, out of choice, go to a 5-year-old and say like, hey, we're going to have a drug for what ails you in 15 years. So just hold on tight. And as soon as you're out of high school, come back to me, right? You would say, I'm so sorry you're having this infection or this disease. I want to treat you today, right? And so I think because we have more and more information about both the biology that underlies infectious and non-infectious diseases, and we have more information about the drugs that we already have out there developed, we're going to be able to put that information together and actually come up with strategies to cure diseases, both infectious and non-infectious, using some of the tools that we already have. And you're seeing this begin to happen with SARS-CoV-2, where people are sort of desperate for a solution and using some of the things that we already have in the clinic in order to try to intervene. I would argue we should address many things with that level of urgency, and I think we're starting to realize that that's possible in some cases.
Great, thank you. Ghayda, I'm going to direct that question to you as well. As a reminder, what do you see as a breakthrough in the next 5 years? So in that shorter term, what do you see happening?
Yeah. So as a geneticist, one of my big hopes and dreams is that, first of all, I think that we provide genetic technologies and we make that available to as many families as possible. It breaks my heart sometimes when I see families whose child might have a genetic problem and they go years, without knowing the diagnosis or knowing the answer. The term that's actually used in genetics is a diagnostic odyssey. This diagnostic odyssey phenomena is something that truly breaks my heart. But actually what's happening, and thankfully this is all in the past decade or so, is that this problem has really improved quite a bit. Just like Alexis mentioned, actually, when we see a child who has some neurological problem, we don't want to say, well, come back in 10 years, maybe then we'll know the answer, which was the case for a lot of our families decades ago. Right now, genetic technologies are becoming more widely available for families, no matter where they are, but I hope to see it in my career become available to every family and as quickly as possible. The second big goal and hope as well and this comes from some of our work on epilepsy and our epilepsy surgery project, is to really shorten that time frame also between finding that genetic mutation and finding a better cure. And I think that kind of trajectory is becoming so much shorter because we've got so many amazing technologies. So, and I don't know if there is one amazing technology, for example, that's been actually quite in the news lately because the people who invented it, there are two women who won the Nobel Prize, is genome editing, or CRISPR. So where we now can actually have the technologies and the methods, thanks to the work of these two amazing scientists, to actually fix genetic errors at the DNA level. And this isn't something that was even, dreamt of, years ago. And so I hope that through all of these amazing developments that we can actually shorten the time frame between finding the root cause and actually trying to fix that root cause. And I think we're well on our way there, not just for epilepsy, but for a lot of other genetic problems, cystic fibrosis, spinal muscular atrophy, Down syndrome. There's so many pioneering treatments that are right now being studied that I think it's really, really exciting. So I'm really hopeful that these will come to fruition.
Great, thank you. And we have gone over, but there's a number of other great questions we don't have time to get to, unfortunately. But Dr. Walker-Harding, I'd love to have you sort of end for us about what you see as the next exciting thing at the Research Institute. There are so many things going on at Seattle Children's Research Institute, and even with COVID, and the response to that has been really quite fascinating to watch. But what do you see in the next 5 years? We'll use that same time frame as some of the work that you're seeing.
Yeah, there's amazing work going on with COVID, and in particular, that was pretty exciting to watch people pivot from what they were doing to within weeks, putting together studies, putting together ways to look at how we can treat it, how we can understand it. Why aren't kids getting as sick as often as adults? We had people looking at that right away, looking at how can we make sure that there's equity in what treatments and availability we have for testing for all people. There are people here that pivoted very quickly to do a lot of that work. I think it's what I see, and they kind of touch on it in a way that's happening, is our ability now to work across disciplines. You're hearing them have a lot of synergy together, even in what they're talking. To me, the idea that we have such an availability of data, we have so many amazing people at SCRI, and from looking at community health to looking at neurological disease to looking at immunology, and how do we help people fight illness when they get an illness, to how do we have behavioral health, how do we address mental health better. There are so many different types of scientists that we have in SCR, and as we have more data and we can look together, I think we're going to find a number of solutions. Like, we find one root cause, like for me, substance use. You look at, you can say, okay, we're going to go and stop kids from using substances. Well, we found out that you can also, at the same time you're stopping kids from starting substance soon, you decrease mental health problems, you increase the ability for them to go to school, you increase parenting ability so that the kids, that the family has good working relationship. All these things from one thing you can do, one intervention, you can really help a child. And it's the same with the biological stuff. So as we look at the root causes of things, and places like SCRI, like our group, where we have so many different people doing different areas of science working together, and that's something we're working on now in the Institute, working together to come up with some common themes that all of us can attack at the same time from the different spaces that they're in. That's what I see in 5 years, that we're going to be able to say, man, look at this. These scientists have worked together and really found some key pieces that they can focus on that will help a range of things at the same time. I think we're at that point with data, with things like CRISPR, with looking at genetics, with looking at how we can tie the clinical world to the bench science world. How do we do that well? And I think that's what I'm excited to see over the next 5 years.
That's so great. It's so inspiring listening to each of you. I feel so privileged just to be play such a small role, but watching you. You're kind of the rock stars in our world. So thank you so much for your time. And wow, these questions have just been amazing. So thanks to all of you. Our team is trying to capture those, and we'll try to connect you with our panelists to follow up. We're also going to be sending a survey. You know, these virtual events are fairly new to us, as they are to many of us in our personal and professional lives. But we'd love to hear from you. What worked, what didn't? And if you'd like to hear more from Alexis or Ghayda about their work, or Dr. Walker Harding about her work in adolescents, we'd love to connect that and provide those opportunities. So let us know that as well. And we want to make sure we can provide as engaging opportunities like this that we can, because we do have these really brilliant researchers and physicians at Seattle Children's. But a huge thank you to them, and to those of you who have joined us tonight. Thank you so much. Thanks for your ongoing support for our research champions and all of our donors who make that work possible. We couldn't do it without you. If you're interested in learning more about research champions, please do let us know in the survey. We'll be happy to get back to you. But we are just so grateful to all of you. Have a wonderful evening and take care.